Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World, the Eurozone. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Russian forces launch an overnight combined airstrike on infrastructure in the central city of Kremenchuk, causing power and water outages as winter approaches. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says that it downed 77 Ukrainian drones overnight as both sides continue cross-border air attacks. Outgoing US envoy to Ukraine says a deal to end the Ukraine war is really close, and remaining issues include Ukraine's Donbass region and one of the main nuclear plants. He also claims that both sides have suffered 2 million casualties during the near 4-year conflict. Moscow welcomes changes in the US national security strategy, saying the adjustments made mark a radical departure from Russia's previous strategy. Kremlin spokesperson Peskov says that the new changes were largely consistent with Moscow's vision. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he has had a substantive call with US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner about ending the war. He says Kyiv will work in good faith with Washington and that both sides have agreed on the next steps and future formats for peace. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that supporting Israel is a key part of Germany's policy shortly after arriving on a visit to Jerusalem. This comes after Germany resumed armed supplies to Israel after international condemnation following the state's conduct in the war in Gaza. Hundreds of demonstrators in London urged the UK government to block China's proposed new embassy, warning it could enable spying and harassment of dissidents. The project, delayed for years, faces new scrutiny as activists say it could become a site for intimidation and illegal targeting of Hong Kongers. Lithuania's Vilnius airport resumes flights after balloons again forced a temporary airspace shutdown, the latest in a string of disruptions in recent months. Officials say air traffic restarted at 5:30 p.m, marking at least the 10th such closure since October. Heathrow Airport says teams are working with emergency services after an incident in the Terminal 3 multi-storey car park. Police say the situation is isolated and confirm it is not linked to terrorism or any form of protest. Those are the headlines of the hour, and we of course start with Europe's defining crisis, the Ukraine conflict. And Russia has welcomed changes in the US national security strategy, with Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov saying the adjustments are largely consistent with Moscow's vision. Peskov noted that the absence of Russia being labelled as a direct threat in the strategy is a positive step and can pave the way for more constructive discussions. He added that the US approach under President Donald Trump marks a shift from previous administrations and offers a chance for cooperation, particularly in the area of strategic stability. The Kremlin plans to review the updated US strategy in more detail, analysing its provisions carefully as both sides look for ways to improve relations. We're now joined by Gilbert Doctorow. He's a Russian affairs expert and he joins us live from Brussels. Thank you very much, Gilbert, for joining us here on NewsX World. Some positive statements there when it comes to US-Moscow relations. How do you view them going forward, especially after this statement from the Kremlin today?
The changes for what they see and like in Mr. Trump's national security strategy paper, they could find in his 2017 national security strategy paper, December of that year. This is a regularly issued document by the U.S. presidents. What I'm saying is that Mr. Trump's remarks about Russia, his remarks in general about how the world should be organized and America's place in it, is a direct continuation of what he was saying in 2017 and should not be judged solely on what is going on around us today, last week, or 2 months ago. It is consistency in Mr. Trump's view of how foreign policy should be interest-based as opposed to values-based. And this is coming from the mentorship of Trump under Henry Kissinger. This is often overlooked. In the electoral campaign of 2016, Trump was taking assistance, advice from Kissinger, and in the first half of 2017, the first half of his time in office in the first term, Kissinger was actively and regularly conversing with Trump about policy. So we're looking at an overall move towards realism, which is called here pragmatism. And dealing with Russia is in that context. There are no evil countries, evil persons. There are competitors. Russia is a competitor. China is a competitor. Indeed, in the document, if you look closely, there are things that are very helpful to reintegrating Russia into the Western international business community, including even, and this will shock anyone who looks closely, including even the suggestion that Russian gas should be supplied to Europe because German industry has deindustrialized to take advantage of cheap Russian gas in China. You have to look closely at this document. It's a remarkable document.
Gilbert, of course, Donald Trump has received criticism from both within his own party and, of course, the Democrats and, of course, abroad when it comes to this. Do you think there's long-term weight in this plan?
Absolutely. As long as Trump remains alive, breathing, and sitting in the Oval Office, and assuming that he will be succeeded by J.D. Vance, which is possible but not necessary, then the outlines that Trump sets out of a U.S. foreign policy that is weighted towards Latin America, that assumes some power sharing in the world with the other great powers, namely China, Russia, and probably India, that is all to be foreseen and expected. And it is a remarkable change in direction from the last 50 years at least of American foreign policy.
Yes, okay, Gilbert, do stay with us as we have further updates coming our viewers' way. Now, US Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, says a deal to end the Ukraine war is now within reach. Kellogg, who is due to step down in January, said negotiations were in the last 10 meters, which is the most difficult stage of any peace effort. He said that two key issues are still not settled. One is the future of Ukraine's Donbass region. The other is the control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, which remains under Russian control. He said resolving these points could unlock a broader settlement. Kellogg described the human cost as horrific, however, estimating over 2 million casualties combined, though neither side confirms the figures as of yet. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that he had a long and substantive call with US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Gilbert Doctorow joins us once again. Gilbert, of course, the Trump administration is known for making such statements. However, are we really as 10 meters away from peace on Europe's eastern front this time?
I'd like to use a slight variation on an old folk principle. Off by 10 meters, off by a mile. Either you have it or you don't have it. This statement coming from Kellogg before he leaves office, I'd say in some disgrace, is just what the British would say. He would say that, wouldn't he? It would seem, making this statement appears that he is leaving on a high note and that he contributed in some way to this successful prognosis for ending the war. That is absolutely not the point. Mr. Kellogg was on the Ukrainian side, was a foot dragger, and was an obstacle to reaching peace. So I don't take his words to be at all serious.
Gilbert, what more can you tell us about Keith Kellogg? Of course, you said he's outgoing, and you said that he was originally on the Ukrainian backing side.
Yes.
Does this mean further positive? Does this mean that there really is some hope for peace in Ukraine?
Mr. Trump is very careful to orchestrate the people around him to confuse totally where he's headed, where he's taking the United States. That he kept Mr. Kellogg, or General Kellogg, on board was precisely to mislead his enemies in the European Union and domestically in the United States, to let them think that perhaps he was following the advice of General Kellogg, who was generally pro-Ukrainian. That was all nonsense. Mr. Kellogg was there as window dressing, not because the views that he espoused were taken seriously by Donald Trump.
Okay, Gilbert, once again, do stay with us as we move over to the ground, where the Russian Defense Ministry has said that its forces have carried out a massive strike on Ukraine's military-industrial complex, energy facilities and port infrastructure in Kremenchuk. The ministry has added that the strike was in response to Ukraine's overnight attacks on Russia's civilian objects, adding that the strike involved long-range, high-precision air and ground-based weapons, including Kinzhal hypersonic missiles and long-range unmanned aerial vehicles. Meanwhile, the governor of the Rostov region in Russia has said that Russian air defense units thwarted a drone attack in the region. Earlier, the Russian Defense Ministry had stated that its forces had shot down 77 Ukrainian drones in several locations overnight. Gilbert, of course, as diplomacy is at the forefront of this, aerial strikes continue to fly over borders on the ground. What more can you tell us about the situation, the territorial gains that Russia is making, and of course the damage that both sides are conceding during and approaching these winter months?
Well, I agree with your assessment that both sides are suffering damage caused by the other side. It's not completely lopsided. However, and I understand the Russian military would celebrate its successful attack on Kremenchuk. Nonetheless, the idea that the war will be ended one day sooner by destroying one or another city in Ukraine is nonsense. This is whack-a-mole, as we call it in colloquial English. You hit a mole next to one molehill, and he goes underground and builds and comes out at another molehill. You cannot end the war by these airstrikes. Everybody knows that wars are ended by troops on the ground, not by airstrikes. So the Russian military can celebrate this successful strike with Kinzhal rockets. It's very good target practice for demonstrating the effectiveness of these new generation Russian missiles and drones. But that is not decisive in ending the war. The war will end most likely by the political collapse of Ukraine.
And Gilbert, of course, how, given the broad scope of this and some of those comments there from the US envoy to Ukraine, if this war truly is 10 meters from its end, whether it does reach a diplomatic end or not, do you think Moscow's campaign can look back in prowess?
Well, Moscow's campaign has taken much too long. We're approaching year 4. If other methods had been used rather than this war of attrition, it could have been ended in a matter of weeks, a few months, going back to 2022, even with the interference, the malignant interference of the British and other Westerners who persuaded Mr. Zelenskyy that they would provide all necessary assistance and he could push back the Russians. Notwithstanding that, if the Russians had used not 1-to-1 force ratio when they staged their invasion, but the normal military configuration of 3-to-1 advantage over the defending side, then the war would not be going into year 4. So the Russians have a lot of things to be happy about. After all, they are winning, and after all, Ukraine is losing. But this has taken much too long. Many more soldiers and others have died in a war that could have ended much sooner.
And what about the long-term repercussions of it? We've just heard Keith Kellogg say 2 million fatalities on both sides. We don't know the exact number of that, of course. I'm sure we won't for a very long time. We do, however, know infrastructure damaged severely on both sides, along with civilian infrastructure, as you've mentioned. The long term of this conflict, what are your thoughts?
Well, of course, the ratio of how many of those 2 million, he's probably right about 2 million, but he's assuming, he's letting the audience assume that it's 1-to-1, the 1 million Russians, not this nonsense. It's probably more like 1,000,005, 1,000,007 Ukrainians have died or have been maimed for life, and say 300,000 or 400,000 Russians have died or been maimed for life. These are terrible numbers. At the same time, I point out that it's not as though it's one generation is being wiped from the face of Ukraine. People speak blithely as if, this is a war that's being fought by the young. Well, they just don't watch television. They don't see who's doing the fighting. On the Ukrainian side, most of the POWs that are interviewed by Russian television look like they're in their late 50s or 60s. They are not the fresh youth of Ukraine. The fresh youth of Ukraine is here drinking in bars in Brussels, not fighting the war in the trenches. So for Ukraine, this is a devastating loss of males across all age groups, which it will take them a long time to recover from.
Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you here on the programme. We now move on to our next story, and former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has said that she is quite concerned about US President Donald Trump's second term's foreign policy, arguing it marks a shift away from what she called core American values. Speaking on a panel at the Doha Forum in Qatar, she accused Trump of effectively supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine by rarely criticizing Russian President Vladimir Putin and pressuring Kyiv towards a ceasefire deal that she said would leave it vulnerable to further Russian aggression. Let's take a listen in to her statements.
Well, for example, supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, both in an affirmative way by very rarely criticizing Putin for the brutal war that he has waged on the Ukrainian people, and then, attempting to try to coerce the Ukrainians into accepting a negotiated ceasefire and peace deal that would be, by any objective measure, leaving them vulnerable to further Russian activity. Remember, Russia has been in Ukraine since 2014, so this didn't start in 2022.
Now let's move away from Eastern Europe and head to the Mediterranean Sea, where 17 men have reportedly died after a migrant vessel was found drifting off the Greek island of Crete. 2 survivors are also critically injured and have been hospitalized. Now officials say that the vessel was partially deflated and taking on water, forcing passengers into a cramped space. The boat was spotted 26 nautical miles southwest of Crete by a Turkish cargo ship, which then alerted its authorities. Moreover, Greek Coast Guard and EU Frontex teams too rushed to the scene, with the EU Frontex agency sending an aircraft and a helicopter to aid in the rescue effort. Sources say that migrants are increasingly using Crete as a route from Libya to the European Union, with more than 16,700 arrivals recorded this very year. We move on next to the United Kingdom, and hundreds of protesters gathered in London, urging the UK government to not allow China to build a vast new embassy complex in the capital. The site, once home to the historic Royal Mint, was purchased by Beijing in 2018 for a reported $327 million. But years of delays have stalled approval, with the latest decision now set for January the 20th. Demonstrators say the proposed embassy could become a hub for surveillance and intimidation, particularly targeting Hong Kongers living in the UK. One doctor, originally from Hong Kong, warned that activists fear the compound could be used not just for espionage, but even for unlawful detentions. The government has not commented on the renewed concerns, but campaigners are urging the UK government to block the project entirely. Let's listen in to what some protesters had to say.
And we are concerned that the new embassy in London is going to become a center of espionage, but also a center of illegal arrests for Hong Kongers like me who have been involved in anti-Chinese demonstrations and anti-Chinese protests in the past and also at present, as well as Hong Kongers who have come across to Britain to seek refuge since the 2019 demonstration and the suppression afterwards as well.
I worry about the whole UK in a sense, because the Chinese government is doing everything to infiltrate into everybody, including Hong Konger or anybody who actually come from the mainland China too. So, or anybody, they just spied on anybody.
We move back over to the east of the continent for another update. And in Ukraine, the central city of Kremenchuk was hit by a combined overnight airstrike, knocking out power and water across several districts. The mayor says Russian drones and missiles targeted key infrastructure, triggering fires and major damage. Kremenchuk, an industrial hub on the Dnipro River and home to one of Ukraine's largest oil refineries, has now been repeatedly attacked. City crews are working to restore electricity, water and heating while officials assess the full impact. Ukraine's Air Force issued multiple warnings overnight as Russian forces intensified long-range strikes ahead of winter, aiming to pressure civilians and disrupt industry. Okay, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.